All right, guys, today we're going to look at the home front in World War II. And when it came to the war in general, this is the largest military undertaking in U.S. history. It requires more men, requires more money than any other war we had ever fought before or since. This is a massive, massive military and military as well as domestic war. This isn't just one on the battlefield. This is one at home. This is one in the streets. It's one on Main Street. And all the way to. And U.S. had to raise an army, though. We have always had a long history of keeping a small standing army. We stopped this after World War II, but prior to World War II, we had a very small army. We actually do start drafting for the military prior to our entry into World War II, just understanding that the world was a lot more dangerous and we did need to have more preparedness. In the early days, the soldiers were practicing with broomsticks and flour bags because there was that few weapons for the military at that point. But after Pearl Harbor, there is a wave of volunteerism in the United States for the military. We get 5 million Americans volunteer to fight in the military. The Selective Service Act was expanded. So the Selective Service Act that was created in World War II, it is enacted and expanded, and we now are going to institute our first draft, and our first draft since World War I, and we add 10 million more Americans to that. So you have 5 million that volunteer, you have another 10 million that are drafted into the military, and a lot of people wanted to go. There was even those that were drafted did not try to shy away. There were draft dodgers in World War II, just like any war. But overall, there was a lot of motivation to fight. There were people that were denied their ability to go and fight in World War II, and they were, it was something that bothered them the rest of their life. I had an uncle who was bitter till the day he died that he didn't get to fight in World War II, like my grandfather and his other brothers. There were people that actually committed suicide because they were so distraught that they couldn't go fight for their country. If you've ever seen the first Captain America movie, this is kind of the basis at the beginning. He's considered not physically fit to be in the military, and he keeps trying over and over again to get in. And there were people that did that. They tried to see if they could, what was holding them back before, if they could get away with it not being noticed the next. That was a big difference. Now. What this war also required was a massive change in industry, and the retooling of industry is a major, major part of our ability to fight and win in World War II. Industries were converted from making peacetime goods to wartime goods. So you had a lot of companies that they made certain things, and it changed over to making pencils. If you made pencils, you might start making bombs or bullets because it was easy for the factory to transfer over, and that was something that was very important, for the war. And so there's a lot of, basic domestic products and companies, they stop making those goods. They start making wartime goods. And GM and Ford, they're making tanks and Jeeps and things of that nature that were necessary for the war. They stopped making new vehicles. There's no new model vehicles in those years. After the war, a new car became a big commodity. But, during the war, you have big companies, they stop making a lot of their products, and GM and Ford and Chrysler, they're all examples. The big three, they're making all just wartime products. They're not making anything there that isn't for the war. So retooling of industry was a big part of getting that industrial capacity up to what it was needed to be. And government takes a bigger hand. The New Deal really, in a lot of ways, set this up. But you have the Office of Price Administration taking a big handle and freezing the prices on most goods, not allowing price gouging where companies, because of the war, they increase the price of their products because they know it's more in demand. So they froze that, and that's why government would do something like that. The War Production Board is set up. The War Production Board set up to make sure war industries got the war materials they needed, similar to what was, what happened in World War One, happens in World War Two. And they also determined which companies would be retooled, which obviously, if you were a company, you would want to be retooled because then you were guaranteed money. The government was going to pay you money to give you or to give them the war materials they needed. So you were guaranteed to sell every single thing you produced, which, no matter what company you are, you're never guaranteed to sell everything you produce. But here you're getting that guarantee. So being a company that got to retool was something that a lot of people. Um, the other big contribution when it came to industry was women. Rosie the Riveter, this is the nickname given to women that worked in the factories during the war. 6 million women enter the workforce for the first time during World War II. A third of these women worked in defense plants, and they play a vital role in the U.S. In U.S. production. Um, Unfortunately, when many of these women, when the war ended, many of these women lost their jobs to returning soldiers. They also didn't were not given the same pay. They were paid less than what a man would make in a similar type of job. So while there was more opportunity, there was still the inequities that we struggle to face. Even still today when it comes to women in the work. When it came to changes at home, well, one of the big changes is rationing. Americans were really limited in the amount of goods they could buy. You were not uh, you were not able to just buy whatever you wanted. Gas, meat, bread, all of these things are rationed. People got these books of stamps that they would have to turn in, and it would be their allotted meat and bread and dairy allowance, as well as their gasoline allowance. And my mother would tell the story about how with my grandfather was one of four brothers, so there was a lot of men that were gone, and the women would get together on Sunday and they would pool their rations and get a big roast, and they would all have a Sunday dinner together while everybody else was overseas. And there were some things you just couldn't get at all, or were really, really hard to get. Things like coffee and were something that basic was very difficult to get during the war. Because everything was for the boys, for the troops. So those were a lot of the sacrifices that were made during World War II.